I get this question a lot. Chef, do I need a knife block in my kitchen? Is that really important? And you know, if you have the room for a knife block, and particularly if it's gonna look great on your counter or somewhere in your kitchen, then I say, yeah, go for it. I think they're great. I have this knife block by Wüsthof. That's really my favorite knife manufacturer. And this is their deluxe knife block. This has every single knife that you could possibly want in the kitchen, plus extra slots for some of those unique knives that I just love having available. So we'll see here, I'll do a quick tour of what we have here. I've got steak knives down here. I've got 8 beautiful steak knives. And you know, the thing about steak knives is, I know a lot of people love to use these for cutting virtually everything, but it's really the wrong tool for the job other than cutting your steak. 8 steak knives is more than enough, I find, and I love having these available. They stay nice and sharp if you use them strictly for those days where you're cutting steak. I've got a row of small knives. This is a turning knife or tournée knife. That's for making an 7-sided football shape, which is known as a tournée. This is a paring knife. And keep in mind that when you use a paring knife, you always use a paring knife holding the blade and working towards you. And of course, if you put pressure down on your finger without sliding, you're really not going to cut yourself. That's a paring knife. Let's see some of the other small knives. This is what's known as a tomato knife. It's a smaller knife with a pointed edge for cutting out the core, and then serrated knife for cutting tomatoes. I should prefer to use a standard knife as opposed to a serrated knife. I find that it tears the tomato a little less, but if your knives aren't that sharp, this is a great choice. And then, oh, I've got another paring knife here, and I think this is one of the old ones I've had kicking around. In the next row here, I have some fillet knives, and this is a fillet knife that actually doesn't come with the set, but again, I like to store it in one of the extra slots. And a fillet knife is very flexible, and that's for getting under really delicate bones if you're cutting fish or delicate meat. This is a boning knife, and a boning knife you can see is far less flexible. Like I can push hard and it's nice and springy, but when you compare the two, you can see just how much more flexible the fillet knife is over the boning knife. This does come with the set, and then I have another knife here. This is my old fillet knife. This is the one that I got in culinary school. I've had for many years, and I hang on to it from nostalgic reasons. What else do we have in this kit here? Let's take a look. Kitchen shears. These are great. I really use these around the house for my kitchen, my all-purpose kitchen scissors. I don't use scissors in the kitchen a lot for cutting meat or anything like that. I do cut a lot of butcher twine if I'm butchering with these, and that's what I love about having my scissors right there in my knife block. I've got a nice utility knife here and a utility knife like this, sometimes known as a small carving knife. Great for slicing chicken breast or pork loin, smaller cuts of meat. I try to keep this strictly for cutting meat when I'm carving so that it stays nice and sharp. Next, I have a santuko. The santuko is a Asian style knife with a rocked edge. It can be used either in a rocking motion or on a up and down motion. I personally don't use this knife a lot, but I know a lot of people who prefer a smaller knife really enjoy this, typically because they have a nice deep belly, and they feel a lot safer in certain people's hands. And then this knife comes with a beautiful 8-inch chef knife. Now, an 8-inch chef knife, I think, is something that most people are going to enjoy the size of this, and this is the knife that I use 90% of the time. All of these different knives, this is the one that should get the most action out of any knife block. And of course, when we hold our knife and with a forward rocking motion, you can very quickly and accurately cut all kinds of vegetables, meat, you name it. This one knife will do the majority of the work. I would even say that all the other knives in this knife block are specialty knives, and this is the one that's getting the biggest work out. And then finally, I've got a couple other things here. I've got a carving fork and a sharpening steel. This is for honing the edge, keeping your knives nice and sharp. And of course, as long as you're keeping your knives nicely honed, this doesn't actually sharpen the knife, but it just maintains the edge. You don't need to sharpen them very often. I would say once a year, probably be enough for most cooks. And finally, I have a nice big extra slot here, and I've got my old tennis chef knife here. You can see kind of the difference in the size here. This is a Bob Kramer replica. You can see it's got this patina because it's not stainless steel, so it tends to get that kind of rusty look to it. It's not rust, it's just the way the steel looks. It's a little pitted. And this is the knife that I quite frankly use most frequently at home. I prefer 10-inch over an 8-inch, but I think most people will prefer that size. So if you're looking for a knife block, I would say really only get a knife block if you think that it's going to look great in your kitchen and be a nice accent piece in the corner. You know, you might not need all of those knives. The knives that I use my large chef knife. I use my specialty knives like a boning and fillet knife if I'm working with meat. I certainly use my my carving fork if I'm carving, but you know, I don't use this a lot, but it is nice to have around. I don't do a lot with my paring knife because again, this is for doing really small work. If you're chopping everything with a paring knife, you might find that it's taking a long time to do your knife skills. And things like a tomato knife, well, I just like to use my good old-fashioned knife to cut a tomato, and if it's hesitating, that's a great opportunity for me to know that it needs to be sharpened. So this is the anatomy of a knife block. Whether you need one for your kitchen or not, it's really up to you, but if you have the space, I say go for it. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe.